Hey, welcome to Bigfoot Forensics. Today I want to talk about auditory pareidolia. Pareidolia. Yeah, I got it. Anyway, that and auditory depth perception. So one of the things that I just recently learned on going into the woods with John Baranchak, by the way, he wrote a cool book, and we're going to plug that right now, Grasping Sasquatch. And it's written by John Baranchak. It's called Prepping for Scientific Field Research. So the reason I wanted to plug that is because throughout this book, it talks about understanding perceptions, how the brain works to understand the information that it's receiving. Okay. And that's extremely important for us that are out in the woods at night doing investigations. The darkness can play tricks on us. Definitely sight is off. We're used to seeing things in the light, not in the dark. And sounds. Not everyone's used to being in the woods. There are different types of sounds, different types of animals. There's also sounds that are being made by animals that we didn't know they made those sounds. For instance, you know what? Not getting into that yet. I want to tell you about the story. So John and I go out into the middle of nowhere, and we build a small fire. And I have to say that I was not prepared to use myself as bait. I didn't know that was the ongoing theory of bringing in a Bigfoot. So basically, well, simply put, I was told we give them the high ground. We walk off into the woods. We're sitting in the bottom of the valley. Can't really see up because of all the trees. And we build a small fire. And I have to say that it was quite peaceful with the exception of the loud cicadas, loud crickets, and whatever those other insects were. But those were the two main ones, and they were extremely, extremely loud. So what I had done prior to that, to us setting up that little fire and going there, about 4 hours before, I actually walked about 300, 400 yards past that point on a dry creek bed. And I set up my little Zoom H1N recorder, which, by the way, has a lot more noise than I thought it would. But my first time using it for something like that. So another lesson learned. Anyway, so I put the recorder out and I covered it with little rocks because I thought it might be raining and I wanted to protect it. I should note also that in this dry creek bed, there was moss, and I saw lots of animal tracks, little small ones like raccoons, maybe possum, a bunch of deer tracks that were sliding in the moss, things like that. Nothing else, but that was it. So this recorder's out there recording prior to us getting to our site when it gets dark. And I go to try and find a piece of wood because I want to try a wood knock. Turns out that I couldn't find any wood that wasn't rotting, and the one that I could find that I could pick up without it immediately falling apart, when I struck the tree, it gave a low thud and basically broke into pieces. So no tree knocks. Later learned a good method of doing that was clacking two pieces of firewood together, but I was already burning them. So taking notes. John does a long, loud growl/howl, and I blew my Logan A1 dog whistle that I use for my border collie. Super high pitched and low pitches. You can actually change the tones on them. They're really cool. So I do that. So those are the only two things that we do other than sitting around the fire and talking. All right. So in a roundabout kind of way, I finally get back to telling you that I go and pick up my recorder. Okay. I'm not entirely sure why I told you that entire story. But I set a recorder in the woods, I made recordings, and this is what happened. So I bring my recorder home and I put it into the computer. And because of the insects and the cicadas, because they're so loud, I end up having to use this to be able to listen to it properly. So long story short, I couldn't find John's growl/howl or my whistle. So lesson learned again. Definitively, I need to know that these times are precise, right? So the next time I put out my recorder, I need to give the time that I'm putting it down audibly into the recorder from the same thing I'm using to mark times when we're out in the field. So what I do find is I hear the classic knock. I get it twice, several minutes apart, and a growl, kind of like a quick like that, but really loud. You can almost hear that one slightly echo. And I'm going to get into something that's pretty fascinating in just a moment with just those two things. So I hear this classic, right? And I get all excited because I'm thinking, I have my first tree knock on recording and something growl/huff. Now, I'd like to point out that I know for a fact it's not John. Times don't match up. Also, his was much longer by like 4 or 5 seconds long versus this quick, like 1 second. Okay, so I'd like to point that out. But when you analyze evidence, you have to think like a defense attorney. And this is what happened. I listened to the, and I also hear Eastern Screech Owl in the back doing his thing. And he does his little high-pitched, like scream or whine or whatever he does, and then moves into the, anyway, I can't do an owl thing. Anyway, it's the typical Eastern Screech Owl doing his thing. So then it dawns on me that I need to eliminate the fact that this owl could have made the noise because it happened right about the same time. I know there's an owl there. What other sounds do owls make? Thinking like a defense attorney. So what I discovered is that the barred owl and several other owls clack their beaks. And guess what? It sounds just like wood. So the issue I have in this particular one is that, or having these recordings, is now as a defense attorney, I cannot definitively say that since I had owl activity, that this owl or another barred owl didn't clack his beak together and make this sound that sounds like a wood knock. And I'm going to play this for you right now. Here is a barred owl clacking his beak together, and it sounds just like a wood knock. So as you can imagine, if this particular owl does this, and then he's only a short distance from my recorder, I can't tell you how far away that this owl was from here. So without being there to hear the volume myself, this very easily could have been an owl that was close to my, or just in the general vicinity of my recorder. And that presents a problem. So now I have another variable that I have to consider. Owls can make sounds that sound like tree knocks. And they're going to be consistent and basically make the same tone every time. Which brings up another thing I have for you guys, and I'm going to ask you a question. If you've actually watched this far, here's my big question. Why are all the tree knocks sounding almost exactly the same? How is it possible, after me realizing I'm trying to find a tree limb or a stick to clap together, how is the Bigfoot hitting the exact same type of tree with the same type of stick, making the exact same kind of noise? Just food for thought. I believe in Bigfoot, by the way. I'm just asking questions. So I want to know, how do they make the same noise every time, given that different types of trees have different densities and weather and all that kind of stuff is going to affect sound? But somehow they always make the baseball hitting the baseball bat sound. All right. Anyway, so we have auditory depth perception issues. Auditory depth perception is a concept in sound perception that relates to the ability to judge the distance of a sound source from the listener. So just as visual depth perception allows us to judge how far away an object is, auditory depth perception helps us understand how far away a sound is. This ability is crucial for navigating and understanding our environment. Auditory depth perception involves several clues, including loudness. Quieter sounds are often perceived as being farther away, while louder sounds are perceived as closer. Reverberation. Sounds that are more reverberant, have more echo, are usually perceived as coming from further away, while direct, clear sounds are perceived as closer. Frequency. High-frequency sounds tend to lose energy more quickly over distance than low-frequency sounds, so sounds with more high-frequency content are often perceived as closer. Interaural time differences. The time it takes for a sound to reach one ear compared to the other can provide spatial information, helping to determine the direction and indirectly the distance of the sound. Then we have contextual clues. Our brain also uses context, such as the knowledge of the typical size and sound of an object, to help judge distance. These cues are processed together by the brain to create a sense of auditory space, including the depth or distance of sound sources. So that last one's really important because when we hear the typical Bigfoot knock and it sounds like a baseball bat hitting a baseball, we're automatically going to assume that if it's low in volume, it must be far away. Unless it's an owl, right? Because if that owl is doing the same thing right there and it's low pitched, then we may perceive that that sound is actually a Bigfoot sound, a Bigfoot tree knock coming from a large distance away. So just food for thought. Thank you for listening again. Just one more variable we have to put in our arsenal while we're doing reconstructions and analysis of our information that we've gathered. Thank you for listening.